So our next speaker is Debbie Elliott. Now Debbie is a philosopher, an author, a megalithic traveller, sometimes with megalithic tours, which I highly recommend.
Me too.
She's also an accomplished author of 7 books, and you can find these on her website, currently called Debbie-Elliott.
.co.uk.
So you can't make a mistake with that, yeah. .co.uk. And she also edits the online magazine, The Sunday Tribune. Now Debbie's talk today is The Megalithic Life of Jean-Michel, who sadly passed away in 2009, isn't he?
I think it was.
I think it's 2000, is that right? Yeah, I was amazed how long ago it was. It just seems like yesterday.
Yeah.
It really was. I didn't know Jean-Michel, but the great man himself, but I met him because I gave him a lift from Glastonbury to Stonehenge and then back again, and we sat and talked on the journey. And he was a lovely, lovely guy, an absolutely beautiful guy, and funny. We laughed so much on that journey. It's a shame I didn't get to know him better because his knowledge of the subject as well is just second to none, wasn't it? It was incredible. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing his life story. So please welcome to Debbie.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me okay? I was lucky enough to meet Jean-Michel myself a few times in his last few years, and I'd got to know his partner very well, Christine Roan. He was often talking at Rilco, which I will come to later on, and that's how I met him. I never really got to speak to him personally, but I did used to listen to his talks quite often. And then I went on a few tours with Neil and a few other megalithic tours, and I was quite surprised at how many people didn't actually know who Jean-Michel was. So I thought I'd write this paper, but I know that quite a few people in this room did know him. This isn't a critique of him, so don't worry about that. It's more just what he did and what he brought to us, which is also really why we're here. I started this paper last year, but when I finished writing it, I'd asked a friend to look over it. And he said to me, have you read Paul Screeton's biography of Jean-Michel, which is, that's the cover from it, which I had not. So this is, I'd already written the paper when I read this book. So I'm not really taking anything from him, but I just thought I'd mention that Paul Screeton has written a very good biography of him. Now, Jean-Michel is a vast subject to cover, and I definitely cannot do him justice in this talk. So I do recommend this biography. Most of you have come to this conference because you have an interest in Earth mysteries. And Jean-Michel, who here is looking like Doctor Who, brought the Earth mysteries back into the popular consciousness. Without his work, there is a possibility that we would not be here today, and we wouldn't have all the other fantastic books that are written about megaliths or anybody doing the studies that there are. So Jean-Michel was born on the 9th of February in 1933 in London, and he died the 24th of April 2009 at Stoke Abbot. He was named John Frederick Carden Michell and grew up at his maternal grandfather's house in the Berkshire Downs near Newbury. So as you can see, he looks like a Time Lord. He was apparently 6'3" in height, and I must admit he was a very tall man, but then most people are tall to me. And I think it added a bit of a mystical look to him, because he used to stride about around London, still looking like a Time Lord even in his later years. He studied at Eton, but when he left, he went to work at his father's property business in his early years as a chartered surveyor. But he says he was not very good at this, so he went on to become a writer, which he was surprised at that he was very successful at. His books took off from the start, and he became a countercultural icon. His books gained a cult status immediately. Jean-Michel covered a myriad of subjects, bringing logic to mystical subjects, and was often regarded as an alternative philosopher. No one else was writing what he was writing back in them days. We didn't have all the magazines that we have today where you can read all kinds of articles on antiquarian ages, megaliths and such like. So Jean-Michel was an Aquarius, and like an Aquarian, he set forth to awaken everybody to the Aquarian age, which, depending on your point of view, is upon us or just around the corner. Jean-Michel's books that were very popular led to many people investigating the phenomena of UFOs and the mysteries of the Earth, her ley lines, and the mystery of the stone circles and megaliths. John Michell called himself, and this is John Michell's words, a cosmological switchman, hunting for the one right switch to effect an immediate revolution in cosmology. His study of strange phenomena and ancient beliefs and systems was seen as an intellectual bridge between the past and the present. And this is a selection of his books. Obviously, he wrote many. I'm using pictures from these books. Many of these slides are just going to be snapshots from the books because they're hard to find these photos these days. So he was writing books on ancient metrology because he was very interested in measurement, and we'll come to that later. Dowsing the crop circles, which again was one of his favourite subjects. Megalithomania, which was a term he coined himself and many people have gone on to use. The earth spirit, because he was very interested in natural spirits, nature spirits and the elements. The book at the end, Confessions of a Radical Traditionalist, essays by John Michell, which again we'll come to later on. He had quite some strong points of view. And he was fascinated with Glastonbury. He spent a lot of time in Glastonbury, finding the mysteries of it and such like. And then we've got the 12 Tribe of Nations, which he wrote with Christine Rome, all about sacred number. Eccentric lives and peculiar notions. Well, that's about all the strange, different things that go on in the world, like Monkey Man and such like, and strange beasts that have been photographed but never been able to, no one's been able to say what they were. But the books that started it all off for him was The View Over Atlantis and The Flying Saucer Vision, where he brought the UFO phenomena back into the public domain. Next is all about William Stokely, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. He was John Michell's inspiration, and John Michell would say he was his role model. So a brief bio of who Stokely is. He was born on the 7th of November, 1687, and died the 3rd of March, 1765. He was born in Lincolnshire and was an English antiquarian as well as an Anglican vicar. Now, Stokely went around looking at all the different prehistoric sites. So sorry about the picture from a book, but again, it's hard to find this picture. So Stokely set out to research prehistoric monuments such as Stonehenge. He was travelling the country and writing accounts of all the earthworks he came across. And back in that day, there was many, many earthworks that we no longer have. I'm not sure why so many of them being destroyed or taken down. But Stokely was regarded as a forerunner in archaeology because he did archaeological research at Stonehenge and Avebury. He also researched the history of the Druids, again, one of John Michell's favourite subjects. And Stokely thought that the Druids were the ones that created Stonehenge and other such monuments. I myself would love to have asked John Michell what he thought, or who he thought created Stonehenge, because with all these conspiracy theories that are going on these days and ideas of other ancient humans or other creatures walking this planet before we come along, I wonder what he would think today. This is Charles Hoy Fort. I briefly mentioned Stokely, but John Michell's actual other hero was Charles Hoy Fort. Fort set things out for himself and said we must find and discover everything for ourselves. Don't believe what the academics tell us. And John Michell took this on board. So Charles Fort was born in 1874, but he died in 1932. And he wrote many books, which he fully researched, that gave alternative theories to orthodox beliefs. Fort could see that many of the experts, in quotations, just gave any old answer that would fit the philosophy and academia of the times, whereas Fort believed that all possible theories and ideas should be looked at, including the unbelievable. His popular books were Book of the Damned, which was published in 1919, New Lands in 1923, Low in 1931, and Wild Talents in 1932. And again, all these books were him looking at the alternative theories of strange phenomena. John Michell says of him that he was a blaster of all theories and orthodoxies, whether popular, scientific, or religious. Fort believed everything affected everything else, that all creatures were a part of one great self-regulating organism. And so he looked for connections, as John Michell would later go on to do, in any phenomena, in every phenomena, to see whether there was connections. For example, the strange lights in the skies that happened before earthquakes, which were being mentioned more and more, but again the academics would ignore. Fort was also very interested in the way the human mind works. He wrote that the human will is a powerful thing, and that human will was connected to the universe, which meant with the right will, one can do anything, even perhaps teleport or levitate. Now, all this was very controversial in his days, and Charles Fort became, as John Michell describes, the arch enemy of all scientific certainties, and this was a mantle that John was to take on himself later on. So we have the flying saucer vision. The flying saucer vision was published in 1967, but it took John Michell 2 attempts at writing this. And this was because John Michell left the first draft of this book in a cafe in London, and obviously didn't have a copy of it. He never found that. It was lost or possibly stolen. Some say that it was possibly thrown away by the cafe when they were cleaning up. But whatever happened to that, the manuscript that had been lost, John Michell now realised he had to rewrite. So on his second attempt, this is what appeared. The book looks at UFOs as well as folklore. John Michell had seen lights in the sky on numerous occasions, but never actually seen a UFO as such. He had not seen the flying discs or the cigar-shaped flying objects that were being reported in the newspapers. All he was seeing were just odd lights in the sky that he knew were not airplanes and definitely not planets or stars. He was intrigued as to what all these mysterious sightings that all these other people were witnessing actually were. And this book was the first to bring the idea of old folklores, tales and fairy abductions, as well as ley lines and feng shui back into public consciousness. He compares old folk tales and legends with accounts of modern-day alien abductions and UFO sightings. And not many people were looking at that back in these days, and he was the first one to bring this out in a book, which is why it became like a culture icon, because people wanted to know. People were, what are the answers to all these mysteries? Regarding the UFOs that were being sighted everywhere, he decided to look at what they were actually up to, and he called this cultural tracking. He says there have been many reports of phenomena in certain areas in the planet, and I'm sure you've heard of all these different theories of the magnetic, electromagnetic lines going around the planet, and there's reports that UFOs seem to follow these lines. And in the past, people who had seen a UFO, they might not have known what the terminology was for it, and perhaps identified it instead as a flying monster or maybe a dragon. Dragons, to John Michell, probably were UFOs. There are many accounts of the small folk, the fairy and the pixies, coming and talking to humans, perhaps abducting them or enchanting them. Well, John Michell could see a relation between the reports from the past of people being abducted by fairies with that of people who are saying they're being abducted by the grey aliens of today. And other alien types are available. Could the fairies and the small folk from the legend be the ETs we want to talk about today? And again, when John Michell was putting this theory across, he was probably one of the first to be discussing this kind of thing. So this is Jung's book on flying saucers. People's explanations for events and strange phenomena changed with the times, and Jung was putting this idea across, which was the same one as John Michell, saying that all the encounters with dragons, fairy folk from the past are just what the alien abductions are these days, and the dragons are the UFOs. John Michell was greatly influenced by the book Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky by Carl Jung, and this book was published in 1958. In his book on UFOs, Jung links the sightings to a change in thought of people of what they were encountering. He perceives it as a new way of thinking that comes with the necessities of the age. The concept of UFOs came at the beginning of a new age, and this was mankind's way of understanding or attempting to understand this mystery. It is mankind's attempt to take in a more complete understanding of consciousness, the world, and us in it. Because Jung and Michell were both looking at, are we creating these with our minds, or are they really coming from somewhere else? John Michell gives many different views as to what UFOs might be: interdimensional, part of human consciousness, actual visitors from Mars. But John Michell believed that UFOs went along the ley lines, the magnetic tracks around the Earth, and that is why they are only seen in certain parts of the world where these ley lines are flowing. So with the view over Atlantis, John started discussing ley lines, which were rediscovered by Alfred Watkins, as I'm sure many of you know. And they are the energy lines of the planet that run between the ancient sites. John Michell writes about Watkins' research in his book, View Over Atlantis. He noted, like Watkins before him, that ancient sites are along ley lines, and John Michell described this as a gigantic work of prehistoric engineering. In this book, John Michell discusses Atlantis not as the sunken land, but the forgotten science of the ancestors. This was a time when ancient civilization was in tune with the earth and her forces. It was a golden age. Art and science worked together to make a harmonious society who lived harmoniously within the earth. In View Over Atlantis, Atlantis is a metaphor for a lost civilization, now out of sight, but is not gone. We are just blind to it. John Michell believed we can get this society back if we would just work in the old ways, implement the ancient system back into our lifestyles. And he also says, it would be possible once again to commune with the natural rhythm if we rebuild our towns and cities to the sacred numerical measurements. And John used to look at all the ancient civilizations and how the golden era of cities and peoples that worked with nature, like in olden times, science and religion went hand in hand, and he thought that we should be bringing that back together. He writes about geomancy and the geomancers, the diviners of the earth energy currents. Geomancers knew how to harness and direct this current, and because they understood the laws, they knew how and where to set up station points, perhaps raise a temple, plant a standing stone or two, whose function would be to make use of this energy that's going around the planet. Of course, in modern day terms, this led to Dowsing, and one of the projects John Michell championed was the Dragon Project, founded in 1997 and set up by Paul Devereaux to investigate this kind of thing. The picture at the bottom is, I'm not sure if that is Paul Devereaux, I can't see it from here, but this is the group, the Dragon Project, working on the stones and trying to harmonise with the stones. Earthworks is the book by John Michell, which sadly he got a lot of bad reviews for when it first came out, and he was quite ridiculed for his ideas. But this just drove him to prove his ideas even more and his theories. This led John Michell to look for other lines across the country, other ley lines that would cover the whole planet, and try to join them all together. He found alignments and looked for gaps on his maps where there had been either fallen stones or missing stones, and started putting together a map of all the ley lines and all the different sites that he thought were or should be there but have now disappeared. And this inspired a lot of other people, including the Dragon Project, who other folks started looking for alignments, and then they'd get in touch with him, and then he would try and put this big map together. So he was looking for ways to protect the stones and sites, but it seemed the National Trust and people like that weren't really that interested unless it was something big like Stonehenge. To John Michell, the ancients were not barbarians, which is what the academics are saying, even though they built things like Stonehenge and such like. He says, John Michell prefers to call them as Arcadians. They are people that knew how to live with the earth, the sky, and all of the earth forces, the earth spirit. And this led him on to write this book and title it The Earth Spirit. So this is John Michell's book about how the ancient communities tried to bring the earth spirit under their control, to be able to manage it by creating the passages, the paths between sites, and aligning stones and temples along them. John Michell explains how early man tried to follow the universal free spirit and catch it at sacred places. He then also goes on to talk about perpetual choirs. And these are choirs that were sung by the ancients because they used music and voice at these sites, according to John Michell. Chanting was an important part of all the rituals, and John Michell calls them perpetual choirs because it would be a group of singers all together chanting a magically sustained tune or a mantra that would align with the music of the cosmos. In other words, like the harmony of the spheres. And this led him on to doing a little history of astroarchaeology. This book is all about astroarchaeology, about the alignments of the megaliths with the stars and the planets. John Michell is advocating that megaliths and stone circles were made by clever people and not the savages. And this book came out in 1976. And sadly, the academics still poo-poo astroarchaeology, though I met a few people. I went to Karahounj in Armenia last year, and they were willing to sit and discuss astroarchaeology, but sometimes when I go to sites, no one wants to discuss it, the academics. They're like, no, it's nothing to do with stars and sun. It's just a lovely stone circle. So John says, it is now clear that astronomy is but one aspect of a traditional code of science which was known to the megalith builders and to architects of temples throughout the ancient world. In their siting, orientation, and interrelationships, these structures are generally related to the patter of the heavens, but they have many features which cannot be explained astronomically. And he goes on to say, resistance to astroarchaeological theory has been intensified by the understanding that if ancient people of the Neolithic culture are credited with an astronomical science far in advance of medieval, and even in some respects of modern standards, current faith in the unique quality of our own scientific achievement is undermined. And we do find that a lot with the academics. They want to make out that us humans in the past were stupid. I'm sure you all know, and I accept myself, that there was probably a much more known understanding of how the world works, which has been lost over the centuries or maybe even the millennia. He goes on to write about how ancient peoples had the knowledge and the ability to create megalithic temples. John Michell and his hero Stukely noted that many of the sites had an astronomical dimension in the setting of prehistoric monuments. John Michell writes about the people who have researched this subject, the antiquarians such as Stukely, and about their theories of how ancient monuments of antiquity and megalithic temples to the stars or astronomical observatories or stationary orreries, like this diagram. Many ancient sites across the world, such as in Egypt and Greece, are aligned to astronomical observatories and observations. Many of the temples of ancient Egypt have doorways that are open to receive the sun or the astral light on certain specific days of the year. For example, those that are dedicated to Isis, the star Sirius, which is dedicated to Isis, then reappears on the horizon in the summer solstice and then shines into what should be the Isis temple. This is when the star shines straight in and summer solstice starts, which is the beginning of the ancient Egyptian New Year. Now, John Michell credits Sir J. Norman Lockyer with developing the science of astroarchaeology. Lockyer studied many sites back in the beginning of the 20th century and wrote prolifically about it. It was Lockyer who saw that there was a connection between ancient sites and the stars in the heavens, and he went to sites and asked archaeologists if they had studied astronomy, and that perhaps they should study the sites from an astronomical point of view. But the archaeologists that he visited sort of laughed at him. Nobody took up the job that Lockyer offered, saying, let me come and investigate the sites from an astronomical view. And I suppose that has led on to people like Robert Bavau and such like looking at this, and it's beginning to, again, come back into the modern, they're big sellers, these books, but academics still don't want to quite accept these theories. So the academics are poo-pooing all these ideas, and researchers of the early astroarchaeologists, because of scientific rationalism, would not allow for studies such as these, of looking at the stones from different ways. And this is Norman Lockyer trying to use the star maps and the star exercises to try and align them all, to see which stones align with which star, or which sun, or which moon, or which day for the sun, which day for the moon. The academics like to believe that we are an evolving species, so they question anything the ancients could do or could have done better than us. So this is why the academics don't want to believe that the ancients could have just raised this megalithic site. But then who did, if it wasn't the ancients? They were regarded as primitives by the academics. And John Michell, who brought this subject back into popular study with his books on research on the subject, reminds us that back in the day that the academics started a vendetta against people such as Lockyer, and they were still doing a vendetta against John Michell and the likes of Eric von Daniken and people like that. The academics like to keep subjects separate: astronomy for astronomers, science for scientists, archaeology for archaeologists, whereas John Michell and people like John Lockyer were saying that no, all these subjects should be working together, and that all these different, like the archaeologists, the astronomers, should all be talking to each other. So next we come to Glastonbury, which is very big big place in the heart of John Michell. He spent a lot of time there. In 1971, he was the man who inspired Glastonbury to hold a fair, and thus Glastonbury Festival was born. So I did get in touch with the Glastonbury Festival folk, and they said, yeah, it was John Michell who they came to speak, who suggested it to them, that it should just be a little fair at the beginning, but even though it's turned into a big music festival these days. That's the pyramid stage, which is built to John Michell's numerical sacred canon specifications. It is 1/10 the size of Cheops pyramid, and it also sits on an apex of different ley lines. Because John Michell believed that a numerical sacred canon of numbers was very important in making everything harmonious, and that everything would work much better if we lived in a proper numerical system instead of the one that we have today, but I shall come to that in a while. So this is what John Michell says about Glastonbury. Glastonbury, formerly a centre of ancient cosmic religion that last flourished in Britain among the Druids and, to some extent, among their successors, the Celtic saints. It is also distinguished in prophecy as the place where the true science and philosophy that sustained the harmonious world order of antiquity will again be revealed. The promise of the great return, expressed in such images as the descent of the New Jerusalem, the restoration of the Graal, and the reconstruction of the temple, is also written on a document recently discovered in the Glastonbury area. This document is nothing less than the landscape itself, inscribed with a number of lays that form together a significant pattern, repeating in the most vivid and enduring manner the ancient promise of St. John's New Jerusalem. We come to Stonehenge, which John Michell wrote an awful lot about. And there are two very important pieces by him. They're essays from his Radical Traditionalist series. Stonehenge, its Druids, Custodians, Festival and Future, which he wrote in June 1985. And Stonehenge, its History, Meaning, Festival, Unlawful Management, and the Police Right of 85 and Future Prospects in 1986. There'd been a free festival at Stonehenge on the summer solstice for many years, but in 1985 the police decided to treat the New Age travellers and criminals as criminals and stormed the festival. It all turned very bad. The police were merciless as they arrested everybody and scared the life out of all the gentle hippies and peace-loving hippies and travellers. The event became known as the Battle of the Beanfield, and I personally myself believe it still needs to be investigated. We're looking back at why the police thought that it was okay to come in like this, but again, they're not really wanting to give any answers to us. The police were brutal, and the whole place was badly managed by the authorities. John Michell was infuriated by the whole affair, and let me see, I've got it, no. So this is the Stonehenge Free Festival poster that was being advertised for that time. And John Michell wrote about this whole Battle of the Beanfield. Stonehenge should be returned to legality by removing fence, car park and other accretions, closing the road going past them and leaving the stones as the only visible structures above the sheep-cropped turf. Tourist facilities with shops and a museum should be built on a site sheltered by trees about a mile away, from which visitors could walk to the stones by way of other ancient monuments. On the other side of the tourist centre, and at a similar distance from them, land should be found for the festival, which would be held legally under whatever conditions were agreed between its organisers and the authorities. On the eve of the longest day, the Druids would proceed on foot to their temple to perform the priestly offices, watched at a respectful distance by the crowd. That is the right by virtue of seniority. After they have seen the sun up, it is the turn of others, pagan and sun worshippers, to occupy the temple. By this arrangement, Stonehenge regains its natural appearance and performs once more its proper function as national equilibrator, the instrument by which its priests, the Druids of classical record, effectively served the national as peacemakers. So what he is saying is that every human has the right to visit Stonehenge or any other megalithic monument or temple anywhere in the land, and shouldn't be owned by any corporation, or that we should be charged to go and see it. So next we come to the crop circles. John Michell wrote 2 books on crop circles: Dowsing the Crop Circles, New Insights into the Greatest of Modern Mysteries, and Crooked Solly, a crop circle revelation, which he wrote with Alan Brown. There are accounts of crop circles that go way back in history, and in olden days it was thought they were the work of the devil. John Michell wonders if in fact these were not the work of the devil, but the indications of a lost science, perhaps performed by some secret society, or by the earth itself. Crop circles absolutely fascinated John Michell, who saw sacred geometry within them as well as regarding them as sacred art. And he started a magazine on the subject, which lasted for 9 issues and was titled The Seriologist. There were many theories for how crop circles appeared. Did UFOs drop down from the sky and make them with their advanced technology? Other suggestions were they were natural phenomena, perhaps whirlwinds. One proposal which I quite like is that crop circles, these complex symbols and pictures made in wheat fields, were done by migrating hedgehogs. In 1991, Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley announced that it was them that were making the crop circles, and most of the media immediately believed them, and so it became known that all crop circles were hoaxes. And so John Michell, with his friend Rupert Sheldrake, decided to put together a competition. So because there was all this idea that they were hoaxes and they were supposed to be man-made, and they were trying to explain to people, well, how can they be, even they're so complex? So they started this competition. They thought that if it was true for a few crop circles that some were man-made, then they had doubts for all the others. For a start, there were hundreds of crop circles occurring around the world each year. How many of them could be hoaxes? And if they were hoaxes all by the same few people, how were these few people getting around the world so quickly and making all these crop circles happen? Because I'm sure you know crop circles only seem to appear in certain weeks of the year. John Michell and Rupert Sheldrake still felt strongly that the majority was still unexplained. If they were all made by man, who were these people making them, and why were they doing this? Most crop circles are reported to have appeared overnight. So how are humans doing that? In the night, in the dark. So John Michell, Rupert Sheldrake and Richard Adams came up with an idea. Why not have a competition open to anyone to see if crop circles can be made by humans? And so they launched the International Crop Circle Making Competition. This competition was sponsored by the Guardian newspaper, as well as John Michell's own publication, The Seriologist. It was held at, well, just outside Glastonbury, actually, somewhere. I haven't got it written down where it was. I thought I did. They got together a panel of crop circle experts to judge the results. And this competition was open for anyone to take part. An invitation was sent out to Bauer and Chorley, the ones that admitted that they were the ones that had been creating all the others. But sadly, they declined to take part. A design was chosen by the panel, and that's here. This Rupert Sheldrake sent me, because I asked him where I could find pictures of it, so he sent me the PDF from them all. So a design was chosen, and this would be the design at the bottom, So everyone was given this piece of paper and sent to each team 3 weeks before the date, as well as all the rules and regulations. The date was set for the 11th of July 1992, and the competition was to happen overnight, like all crop circles appear. The teams were each given a plot to work on, but no light source was provided. The teams were allowed to provide their own lighting, but they would lose points for using any torches, lamps, or any light source they brought with them. So you've got to remember that the crop circles usually materialise in the darkness of the night. The teams had to work between the hours of 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. At 3 a.m, everybody had to down tools, whether they'd finished the crop circle or not, and come away, and everything. No one was allowed near the fields for the rest of the night. A helicopter was sent up at dawn to take photographs of the results of each team. The 5 judges, led by Jürgen Kronig, decided the results. The actual winning team was 3 men from the Westland Helicopter Company, and they received £3,000, but had to redo their crop circle in the light of day to show everybody how they had achieved the results. And if you want to know actually any more about this, Rupert Sheldrake says he'll be putting this up online on his website soon. He might have done it already, actually. So if you just Google Rupert Sheldrake, his website should come up. So this is John Michell in the 70s. This is going to be about English weights and measures. John Michell was on the warpath in the 1970s. He was passionate about the ancient imperial measurement system. So the government, when it tried to replace it with the metric system, he was so outraged that he went around Britain wearing this T-shirt, Stop Metric Madness, and tried to get everyone to come back to the original imperial system. So this was back in 1970 when everybody was still using feet and inches. And he saw this new metric system as diabolical. He set out to tell the people, well, to remind the people that the imperial measurement system was an ancient system with a sacred origin, unifying man with the universe. As John Michell wrote in a letter to the editor of the New York Times, road signs are in miles, beer is served in pints, and we buy vegetables by the pound. He started a slogan, stand up for the foot, and wrote pamphlets, stand up for the foot, sending them all around the country, a defence of sacred measures and the propaganda of the metric system. He declared the metric system to be a theistic and destructive system set out to separate man from divine sources and the harmonies of the planet and the universe. And this is a quote from one of his articles in the Oldie. For land surveying and other purposes, the Saxons adopted the native system of measures, the ancient British metrology rooted in the Bronze Age or earlier, with its inches, feet, cubits, rods, perches, acres, furlongs, miles, leagues, and many other units, each appropriate to a particular craft or function, but all linked by a comprehensive code of number, which not only applied to measure, but also provided a canon of music and standards of proportion in the arts and crafts. This numerical science was the basis of the Saxon culture, constitution, and code of law. But thankfully, the metric system lost its battle to be implemented. John Michell writes that it ran out of steam in a letter to the New York Times. Right, and I can see I'm running out of time. So this is Alexander Thom, or Professor Alexander Thom, who was a Scottish engineer who attended Oxford and also surveyed megalithic sites around Britain. And his standard unit of measure was what Thom named as the megalithic yard, which is 2.72 feet. And then there is a megalithic inch, which is 2.073 centimetres. Thom wrote many archaeoastronomical books in the 50s and 60s. Megaliths and mathematics was one John Michell championed. He believed that Professor Thom was proving once again that the ancients were not primitives at all, but learned men. John Michell calls them astronomer priests, the type of folk who knew how to set up alignments between the land and the sky. And in his little history of astroarchaeology, John Michell goes on to explain how other astroarchaeologists, investigators work, such as Martin Brennan, whose work is giving credence to the astroarchaeology theory today. Now, does anyone know what site this is? No. Well, this is Newgrange before they decided to muck it up. And John Michell was another one who didn't like it that they were trying to change everything and put their own theories into it. He said that they should have kept it like this. And I think they should have as well. It looks lovely. And it is annoying that they put all the real stones in the museum. Right, I'm going to talk about his next book, The Living Wonders. This book was co-written with Robert J.M. Ricard. On our planet at the time this book was written, there was many undiscovered countries and the depths of the ocean were not and still haven't been explored. And so these places could hide many unknown creatures. Cryptobiology looks at the animals that are seen as freaks and wonders, creatures that go against the natural order of nature. It looks at nature's mysteries and unnatural phenomena. John Michell looks at the relations of animals and books in their natural habitat, and if they change or start to act in an unusual manner, maybe something is about to happen, i.e. the birds start acting weird and then fly off, and then an earthquake happens. So cryptobiology is about the freaks and aberrations in nature, such as the Yeti, Nessie, giant kraken, the sea serpents, the black dogs, and the hairy ape men and such like. There also seems to be, to John Michell, a lot of evidence that much of this phenomena seems to also have a lot of UFO sightings around it. And though he couldn't quite prove it properly, except for by making maps and saying, right, you know, the Yeti was seen here, and a few weeks earlier a UFO was seen here. John Michell looked at the history of cryptobiology, looking at botanists and naturalists from earlier centuries, and many of them would wonder at why the God Almighty would make some creatures extinct and then create new species. So we have here, that's Living Wonders. In the past centuries, abnormalities in nature is often regarded as portents of change or misfortunes to come. Scandinavian bishops in the 15th century were told to keep a record of such things, and it became a book called Relationis Curiosio. And John Michell found this all very interesting, to see that this was still happening back in many centuries ago and not just in modern day. You know, was Bigfoot seen hundreds of years ago by the native Indians? He wanted to find out. He also began to wonder if all this was to do with thought forms. Were people thinking of strange monsters like this, or perhaps through their nightmares? And were these thought forms then creating these creatures? This is a picture from the Living Wonders book. And this was taken up in the 1970s, but it does look like a dinosaur, doesn't it? And they say that it wasn't, if it had just recently died, whatever this was, that wasn't decaying, it only had a few weeks of decay on it, or a few months. But he's wondering if we're still imagining dinosaurs, so are they reappearing in the world, or are they really here in the depths of our oceans, or hidden in places man hasn't got to yet? Thought forms are what they say, things that have been thought up, but if they are thought up strongly enough, or by enough people, these thought forms then become real. And he quotes, "Their status seems similar to that of thought forms of Eastern mysticism, which are visible illusions created by the concentrated desires of a group or individual. Jung's collective unconsciousness influences the world of appearance so that we create it, and that in the last century, scientists and evolutionists were looking for proof of man's evolution from ape, an ape-type man, and they wanted to do this so much that they put their whole thought into it and sent that thought out there, and it grew and turned into yetis, abominable snowmen, and sightings of giants, or sightings of hairy giants, and other relics such as giant skeletons. But sometimes it is not just odd creatures that were seen, but rather creatures seen in odd areas outside of their natural habitats. Ivan Sanderson termed the sightings of big cats in Britain, for example, as the OOP, the out-of-place phenomena. Fulk believed in teleportation, and John Michell started keeping records of these OOP that were appearing, the out-of-place phenomena that were happening everywhere. And he also looked at John Keel's windows. John Keel was saying that through windows, strange creatures could fly or come through time and enter our world, and that we should be able to go through them windows back into their world. They were a curtain dividing the world that we know from the hidden aspect of reality. John Michell terms this all as monster mania. There's a nice big monster under the water. And he questions if this is all mythical and wonders why the academics do not take it more seriously. There are so many reports and incidences like UFOs. In fact, there's millions of reports of UFOs and abductions, yet it is usually ignored. And John Michell asks, surely there is no smoke without fire. So we have here some winged cats. So in Living Wonders, John Michell also discusses the hoaxes which would bring cryptobiology into disrepute. Dr. Albert Koch, this is a fake. He put together this skeleton and it went on show all around the country as a forgotten dinosaur. But it's things like this man doing this, that then made everybody, all the academics, poo-poo the proper work that should be going on. So he had an association with Lindisfarne, which was a non-profit group put together for the study and realisation of a new planetary culture. Its founder was William Thompson, a social philosopher and cultural critic and a follower of Teilhard de Chardin, whose philosophy and theology he based the group on. And de Chardin was someone that Michell himself liked to read and tried to advertise. To John Michell and his friends like Keith Critchlow and the poet Kathleen Raine, they found all these kind of things like the Lindisfarne social agenda a great idea. We need to make more of a meta-industrial village, which is what they were trying to do, put small communities together that focused on substance and crafts, make everybody work for themselves. Their aim was to make the villages worldwide and have them built on John Michell's sacred geometry, which would have made a healthier way to live and a harmonious way to live with the whole planet. And then we have Rilco, Research into Lost Knowledge Organisation. I thought John Michell was one of the founders of Rilco. And when I went and spoke to Rilco, they didn't really want to discuss it. But I have been told that it's because he annoyed a few of the founders not long after it started. Apparently a few of them took exception to some of his articles, where he used such words as big cock and God in the title. And some say he left, some say he was thrown out of Rilco. But my friend Rob Stevenson set up a few years ago, after John Michell died, set up a lecture each year in memory of John Michell. So they'll be coming up soon. And this is megalithomania, the term that everybody uses these days, obviously coined from John Michell's interest in all this. And he also was interested in, his creative side brought out all these beautiful geometric patterns. He was looking at how to put symbolic number and art and colours and shapes into what he would call the dimensions of paradise. He was looking for the heavenly city, which was in the midst of the tree of life, which bears 12 manners of fruit and yielding her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. He went on to write from all this because he believed that the new temple of Jerusalem needed to come back down. He wrote the Temple of Jerusalem, a revelation. And for this research, John Michell looked at the clues in the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, as to how to bring harmonious life back to the world, to the humans, to the people that live here. And he was saying again that we need to build Jerusalem here on earth, in our hearts and as an actual physical place. He says that all this should be built on geometrical and numerical canon, which is an ancient system of ancient measurements that continue in miles, feet and inches. And you've got to remember, John was anti the French meter. The temple plan was revealed to King David and before that to Moses, but it was David's son, King Solomon, who built Jerusalem. And within it is a hidden geometry. It is the old city, and this old city is named in Ezekiel as the Lord is here, which are the last words of the book of Ezekiel. John explains the meaning in how ancient sites are set out in number and proportion, encoded in the design, the canon of number. And he also saw this as a temple of the spirit, seen by the spiritual eye, and John Michell goes on to explain that this temple, when it does finally come down, will be dedicated to the Almighty, and that's the God that you believe in, the Almighty, the one that's you know, we all have our own gods, but there's all one God that supposedly everybody's thinking about. Zionists are those who are drawn to the Almighty, not just the Jews, but anyone that's looking for a divine connection. And so he had these maps of what the revelation of Jerusalem should be like. And I'm going to finish with one of his quotes, which is, "So here is the mystery. The lack of any good rational alternative leaves room for the miraculous, that the wonderful pattern over the holy city was a product of divine providence. The revelation of that pattern was to come about when it is needed, in response to a generation's desire for the healing of nations. And in God's good time, it seems likely that the time has come." So thank you very much.